The convent corridor was silent when Sister Faustina finished her evening chores. The kerosene lamps cast a soft amber glow along the walls, and the faint scent of soap still lingered from the cleaning she had done earlier. It was an ordinary night, simple and quiet, like countless others. Yet her heart felt unusually heavy, burdened by something she could not name. She entered the small chapel, genuflected slowly, and took her place in the last pew. The tabernacle candle flickered gently, and the whole room seemed wrapped in a peaceful stillness. She folded her hands, bowed her head, and whispered her usual prayer, "Jesus, make my heart attentive." As soon as the words left her lips, the silence changed, not violently, not with fear, but with a weight, a presence, like the quiet before a storm that hasn't yet shown its face. Faustina lifted her eyes and noticed nothing unusual at first, but something within her stirred, a delicate awareness, the kind that felt like a hand brushing lightly across the soul. Then she saw her. A woman stood near the front of the chapel, just a few feet from the tabernacle. She seemed to have stepped out of nowhere, appearing with no sound, no movement of air, no shifting of light. She was dressed plainly, like a mother of modest means, her clothing simple, her hair pinned back, her posture tense. What struck Faustina first was not sorrow, nor fear, nor despair. It was confusion. The woman looked around the chapel as if searching for something familiar, something she expected to see, and yet could not find. Her face carried the exhaustion of someone who had lived a life of constant responsibility, but her eyes held a bewilderment that was deeper, unsettling. Faustina's breath caught. This was no living visitor. The woman's presence was unmistakably that of a soul, restless, disoriented, standing in that thin place between earth and judgment. Faustina felt neither terrified nor overwhelmed, only moved with a compassion that rose within her like a quiet tide. The woman finally noticed Faustina and whispered, not with her lips but with her soul, "I was not ready." Faustina's heart tightened. She understood instantly. This mother had died unprepared, abruptly, without the grace of a final surrender. Faustina folded her hands again. "Jesus," she murmured, "let me listen." The woman stood silently, her form wavering as though she existed halfway between presence and absence. Faustina felt her own heartbeat slow, not from fear, but from a solemn reverence for the mystery unfolding before her eyes. Souls did not come to her often, and when they did, it was never without a reason. This woman's confusion revealed something deeper, something unfinished, unresolved. Faustina rose gently from the pew and approached a little closer, stopping halfway down the aisle so as not to startle the spirit. The woman fixed her gaze on the tabernacle, but not with longing, rather with uncertainty, like someone trying to remember a face they should know but cannot recognize. At last, the woman turned her attention fully toward Faustina. Her expression trembled with questions she did not yet dare speak. "Do you know where I am?" her soul asked without sound. Faustina clasped her hands before her, her voice soft, steady. "You are near God's presence and but not yet in His peace." A shadow passed across the woman's face, something like regret, but also something like disbelief. She looked around the chapel again, searching, hoping, perhaps expecting to see light or comfort or welcome. None came. Faustina sensed it. Not a life of wickedness, not a life of rebellion, but a life lived too quickly, too noisily, too full of responsibilities, leaving little room for God. The woman whispered again, "I didn't think I would come here like this." Faustina's heart ached. She could feel the truth hovering around the soul like a dim halo. The mother had not been prepared for death because she had not paused to prepare for life. Everything in her earthly days had been urgency. Children, work, fatigue, survival. Faith had been postponed, pushed aside, drowned by exhaustion. "You were a mother," Faustina said softly. The woman nodded, her eyes filling with a grief far deeper than tears. "I tried so hard, but I forgot him. I forgot my soul. I thought I would have time later." Faustina stepped forward another pace, her expression warm, compassionate, gentle. "Time is a gift," she replied, "but the heart must ask for grace while it is still beating." The woman lowered her head. "I didn't." The chapel grew still again, And Faustina understood. This soul had come seeking not judgment, but understanding. The woman's posture shifted, as if the weight of her own words pressed her shoulders downward. Faustina saw in her expression the unmistakable look of someone who had lived under constant pressure, someone who had given everything to others, yet almost nothing to her own soul. There was no rebellion in her, no hatred of God, only a long-sustained neglect born from exhaustion and fear. The woman's voice, if it could be called a voice, wavered through the chapel again. I prayed, sometimes. When the children were sick, when I was afraid, when life collapsed, but I never stayed long. I never listened. Faustina nodded softly. Many hearts pray only when pressed by suffering. But prayer is not only a plea, it is a relationship. The woman's eyes trembled with recognition. Yes, a relationship. I never had that. I believed in God. I respected him. But he was far, and I was busy, always busy. Faustina stepped closer, slow and reverent. She could feel the spiritual distance between the woman and divine grace. Not a chasm of evil, but a silence, a long stretch of unspoken conversations that never took place. The mother continued, I thought being good was enough. I cared for my children, worked hard, avoided harm. I thought he would understand, that being tired all the time was reason enough not to pray. Faustina's expression softened even more. She did not judge the woman. She recognized the story. Thousands of souls lived this way, drifting gently but steadily away from God, not by sin but by forgetting to love him. The Lord does understand, Faustina said gently. He knows every burden you carried, but even a mother must feed her own soul. Grace cannot enter a heart that is always too hurried to open. The woman's face folded into sorrow. I didn't know my soul was starving. Until now. Faustina lowered her eyes in empathy. The chapel seemed to hold its breath, as though heaven itself leaned in to listen. What happened to you? Faustina finally asked. The woman hesitated. Her form flickered faintly, as if the memory pained her spirit. I died suddenly, she murmured. There was no time to think, no time to turn to him. One moment I was alive, the next I was here, and I realized I had left everything unfinished, my soul undone. A deep silence settled between them. Faustina understood. The tragedy was not the death itself. It was the unprepared heart. The woman's voice dimmed as though the memory of her final moments clung to her spirit like a cold mist. Faustina waited patiently. Souls often struggled to speak of the instant death separated them from their earthly life. It was the moment when everything hidden became clear and everything neglected rose to the surface. I didn't think it would happen that day, the mother whispered. I woke up tired, as always. I rushed through the morning, preparing the children, finishing chores. My mind was full, everything except God. She paused. I felt a pain, sudden, sharp. I thought it would pass. I kept working. I always kept working. Faustina sensed the truth. The woman had lived her whole life on the edge of exhaustion, pushing through every ache, every worry, believing she had no right to rest. The spirit continued, her voice trembling with the ache of realization. I collapsed in the kitchen. My youngest found me. I wasn't ready. I wasn't thinking of him. I wasn't thinking of my soul. I left the world with the same hurry I lived in. Faustina's hands instinctively pressed against her chest. A mother's death at home, so ordinary, so sudden, carried a weight heaven alone understood. And when I opened my eyes, the woman continued, I was here, not in darkness, not in light, just here. And I felt something missing, something I had always carried but never named. Faustina approached one more step until she stood only a few strides away from the spirit. Your soul missed him, she said gently. You had lived without him for so long you did not know how to call his name when the moment came. The woman's face folded into grief. I didn't reject him. I just never learned to turn to him. Faustina nodded. Many souls are lost not by hatred, but by absence, by forgetting the one who waited for them every day. The chapel flickered faintly, as though the candlelight absorbed the weight of the woman's confession. The spirit whispered, "Is there still hope for me?" Faustina felt a deep stirring within her, a mix of compassion and solemn truth. "Hope never dies," she replied, "but a soul must desire it. Grace can reach any distance, but it cannot enter a heart that remains closed." The woman looked down, trembling. "My heart has been closed for so long." Faustina raised her hand slowly, offering comfort, not by touch, but by presence. "Then let us begin to open it." A quiet trembling passed through the spirit, as though acknowledging for the first time the true state of her own heart. She lifted her gaze toward Faustina, and in those eyes, dim, unsettled, searching, there was the fragile beginning of awareness. Souls who died unprepared were often confused, but once truth began to dawn, the weight of it pressed upon them like a gentle but undeniable light. "I never meant to be far from God," the woman whispered. "I thought, if I was kind, if I worked hard, if I didn't hurt anyone, that was enough." Faustina's expression softened with deep compassion. "So many believe that," she replied. "But goodness is not the same as surrender. A soul may perform good deeds and still never open its heart." The woman shook her head slowly, as if trying to grasp a reality she had never understood while living. "I thought he would see my struggles," she continued. "The long nights with sick children, the worries, the loneliness. I thought he would understand why I never prayed." "He does understand," Faustina answered gently. "But understanding is not the same as relationship. God waits to be invited. He never forces himself into a life, not even into a mother's grief." The spirit fell silent. Her form flickered lightly, as though her realization caused her presence to waver. "I didn't know I needed him," she confessed. "I thought surviving every day was faith enough." Faustina drew a slow breath, sensing the importance of this moment. "True faith," she said softly, "is not merely surviving. It is allowing God inside the struggle. Many souls work themselves to exhaustion, believing that loving their families is all God desires. But he desires their hearts as well." The chapel grew quieter, heavy with meaning. The spirit of the mother looked around once more, scanning the chapel's shadows as if hoping to see a sign of divine welcome, yet finding only stillness. "When I died," she whispered, "I expected to feel peace. I thought heaven would open, but instead, I felt distance. A distance I created." Faustina nodded with sorrow. "When a soul lives far from God, death does not instantly bring it close. The heart must know him before it can rest in him." The mother's expression tightened. Fear, sorrow, and longing mingled into one. "Can I learn now?" she asked, voice trembling. Faustina stepped forward, her face illuminated by quiet mercy. "Yes," she said, "but the lesson begins with truth." The woman's form dimmed, as though the admission of truth drained her of the illusions she once carried. Faustina watched with tender concern. Souls often clung to the idea that their external goodness was enough, but when that veil lifted, the weight of neglected grace could shake them deeply. Faustina spoke gently, afraid that a harsher tone would scatter the fragile awakening occurring within the mother. "Tell me," she said softly, "what did you love most in life?" The woman hesitated. "My children," she answered quickly. "Always my children." Her voice held both pride and pain. "And God?" Faustina asked, not with judgment, but with a question that seeks the deepest places of the soul. The mother's expression collapsed into vulnerability. "I respected him," she whispered. "I believed he existed. I thanked him sometimes. But love? I don't know if I ever reached that." Faustina felt a quiet ache inside her chest. "Love of God," she said, "is not something that grows by accident. It grows when a soul chooses him, again and again, even in tiredness, even in struggle." The spirit looked down. "I thought loving my children was enough. I thought God would see that and fill the rest." "He saw it," Faustina said gently, "but a mother's love cannot replace a soul's need for its creator. Your heart needed him too." The woman began to tremble, her spiritual form shimmering like a candle's flame caught in a draught. "I didn't know how to love him," she confessed. "No one taught me. Life didn't give me space. How does a mother learn such a thing?" Faustina took a silent breath. A mother learns by noticing him in her suffering, in her sacrifices, in her breath. God was in your exhaustion. He was in your patience. He was in every tear you shed alone in the kitchen. But you never turned toward him, you only pushed forward. A tearless grief passed over the woman's face. "I thought he was far. I thought he only cared for people who had time and holiness." Faustina stepped closer, her voice steady, filled with quiet conviction. "He cared for you every day. He whispered to your heart, softly, gently. But a whisper cannot be heard by someone who never stops moving." The spirit looked at her, fear rising. "Then, what becomes of me now?" Faustina folded her hands and lowered her eyes in solemn reverence. "Now," she said, "you must learn to do what you never did in life. You must open your heart to him." The spirit's trembling grew more visible, as though the truth Faustina revealed had cracked open the fragile shell she had wrapped around her soul during life. She stood no longer with the posture of a mother carrying burdens, but of a soul finally facing the weight she had postponed for years. Her eyes flickered, with the fear of someone who suddenly realizes how far she has walked without looking back. Faustina spoke with the gentleness of someone who understood suffering, someone who knew what it meant to feel small before God's presence. "Do not be afraid of the truth," she said softly. "It does not come to condemn, but to reveal what the heart has hidden." The woman's voice wavered. "I feel so far, so unworthy. I gave everything to my family, but I gave nothing to God. How could I have lived like that?" Faustina approached one step closer. "You lived as many do, believing that duty was enough, that survival was holiness, that exhaustion absolved the heart. But love must be freely given. God waited not for perfection, but for a moment, just one moment, when you would turn to him." The spirit closed her eyes and her form dimmed as though a shadow passed through her. "I never gave him that moment," she whispered. "Not once. Not truly." Faustina felt her own breath catch. "He knows," she answered. "And he grieves, not because you failed him, but because he loved you so dearly and was never welcomed into your life." A silence fell, heavy yet strangely tender. The woman lifted her head, and for the first time her expression showed something beyond fear, longing. "I want him now," she said quietly, "but I do not know how to reach him. I do not know how to call his name." Faustina's expression warmed. "You begin by seeing the truth, by admitting the emptiness you have carried, by letting go of the belief that you can stand alone." The woman took a step toward Faustina, her form shimmering weaker, as though the realization itself drained her. "But I feel so distant," she whispered, "as if a wall stands between us." Faustina shook her head gently. "The wall is not his, it is yours, built by years of silence, but every wall can crumble when the soul finally desires him." The mother's eyes widened, the first spark of hope flickering within them. "Then help me," she pleaded. "Teach me how to open my heart." Faustina bowed her head with tenderness, understanding the gravity of the moment. "I will walk with you," she said, "but the door must be opened from within." The spirit of the mother seemed to quiver like a fragile flame, swaying between despair and the first faint spark of hope. Faustina could sense the battle within her, not a battle between good and evil, but between fear and surrender, the very struggle that had shaped her entire earthly life. Souls who died unprepared often carried with them the same habits they lived: hesitation, hurry, emotional distance, the instinct to keep moving rather than to kneel. Faustina knew this, and she chose her words carefully. "Tell me," she said softly, "what do you hope for now?" The woman's eyes lifted, shimmering with uncertainty. "I hope to be near him," she whispered, "to feel what I never felt, to be held by the one I ignored." Faustina's heart warmed with compassion. That desire is already the beginning of grace. A soul that longs for God has taken its first true step toward him. But the woman shook her head, fear clouding her expression. What if it's too late? What if the distance I created cannot be crossed? Faustina answered without hesitation. It is never too late for God, but it can be too late for the soul that refuses to turn. You are turning now. That is the miracle. A hush settled in the chapel. The flickering candles seemed to lean toward the spirit as though listening. The mother pressed her hands against her chest, attempting to calm the tremor in her being. I am afraid to look at my life, she confessed. Afraid to see what I ignored, what I postponed, what I lost. Faustina nodded understandingly. Truth is painful, yes, but it is also healing. When a soul sees its own emptiness, God fills that emptiness with mercy. The woman's voice cracked. I want mercy, but I feel unworthy of it. Faustina stepped closer, her expression filled with a deep, steady love. Mercy comes precisely for the unworthy. None of us deserve it. That is why it is mercy. The spirit exhaled in a soundless tremble, as though the weight of years had finally begun to loosen its grip. Then the woman looked at Faustina with a fragile plea. If I open my heart now, will he hear me? Faustina smiled gently. He has been hearing you your entire life. You were the one who could not hear him. But now your soul is listening. The mother's form brightened faintly, subtle but noticeable, a shift from confusion toward yearning. Faustina recognized the moment. The soul was awakening. A gentle shift passed through the chapel, as if the air itself recognized the mother's awakening. Souls rarely moved so visibly from confusion toward longing, and Faustina felt moved by the delicate grace unfolding before her eyes. It was as though the spirit, weakened by years of spiritual silence, finally dared to breathe. The woman looked around the chapel once more. This time, her expression did not carry fear. It carried awareness. She was beginning to understand the distance her heart had sustained, and the possibility that this distance might be crossed. I feel something, she whispered. It's faint, like a warmth. Is that him? Faustina smiled softly. It is the shadow of his mercy. It draws closer when a soul begins to desire him. The spirit trembled, not in fear, but in awe. In life, she said, I always felt alone, even surrounded by my children. I thought God stayed far from ordinary people, especially tired mothers. Faustina shook her head gently. God stays closest to the tired, but exhaustion can blind the heart. You mistook his nearness for absence. A tearless pain crossed the mother's face. I never realized how much I needed him, not until now, when there is no time left. Faustina's expression softened even more. There is still a moment, and sometimes a single moment is enough to open a soul. The woman's form glimmered faintly, as if responding to a grace stirring deep within her. What must I do? She asked. I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to love him. I don't know how to begin. Faustina folded her hands in front of her chest. You begin by allowing yourself to be seen, she said gently. Let God look at your wounds. Let him see your fatigue, your regrets, your unlived prayers. You hid your heart your entire life. Do not hide it now. The mother's eyes widened, filled with both fear and courage. What if he sees too much? Faustina's voice was steady, calm, almost tender. He already has. God has always seen everything. You only refuse to believe that his gaze was love, not judgment. The spirit gasped softly. I want to trust him, but I feel so small. Faustina stepped close enough for the soul to feel her presence like a warm tide. Smallness is the beginning of holiness, she whispered. Give him your smallness. Give him your truth, and he will give you his mercy. The woman closed her eyes. For the first time since her death, her soul leaned, not backward into fear, but forward into faith. The chapel seemed to deepen in stillness as the mother's soul closed her eyes, surrendering at last to a truth she had fled her entire life. Faustina watched her with profound tenderness, a soul that learns to surrender only after death is fragile, like glass touched by light for the first time. But where there is fragility, there is also possibility. The mother opened her eyes again, and this time they held something new. Not confusion, not fear, but a quiet willingness. "I am ready," she whispered, "not because I feel worthy, but because I cannot remain closed anymore." Faustina nodded, her own heart swelling with compassion. "Then let us call him," she said, "not with words, but with desire. A soul speaks loudest when it longs." The spirit took a trembling breath that was not felt in the air, but in the silence around them. "I long for him," she whispered. "I long for what I never sought." At that moment, something changed. A faint glow, not bright, not overwhelming, began to form behind the woman, as if heaven responded instantly to her fragile opening. It was soft, warm, almost like dawn breaking behind a mountain. The mother turned slightly, sensing it, but not yet fully understanding. "Is that?" she murmured. Faustina smiled. "Yes. Grace always waits for the smallest door." The light grew, gentle but steady, wrapping the woman's form like a delicate embrace. She shivered, not from fear, but from recognition. "I thought he didn't want me," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought he wanted saints, not women who spent their lives too tired to pray." Faustina's voice lowered, filled with quiet authority. "He wants hearts. Your tiredness never repelled him. It only made his love draw closer. But love must be received." The mother turned fully toward the light now, her form brightening with each moment. "Then I receive it," she whispered. "I give him everything I never gave. My silence, my fear, my mistakes, my heart." The glow enveloped her completely, not pulling her upward or downward, simply holding her as though grace itself was teaching her how to be loved. Faustina bowed her head, whispering, "Jesus, take her. She has finally opened her heart." And then, with a final shimmer, the spirit faded, not into darkness but into light. The chapel returned to silence. Faustina remained kneeling, overwhelmed not with sorrow, but with awe. A soul unprepared had become a soul awakened.